The History of Action Figures, Part 1, 1960 to 1980.
G.I. Joe, fighting man from head to toe, on the land, on the sea, in the air.
Someone's coming, Chewie. Who's there? It's Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker. Now I know the Force is with us.
The Super Foes, the arch enemies of the superheroes.
Action figures. What do you think when you hear those words? It's a word much like superpowers or superheroes. The word invokes different things to different people. You can think of big army soldiers, comic book heroes, muscle space gods, and maybe even science fiction aliens. Action figures might be different things to different people, but let's take a look at the history of action figures. In 1964, Hasbro coined the term action figures to market their G.I. Joe Figures for Boys line. At this time, any toys of this style was labeled doll, such as Mattel's Barbie doll. However, Hasbro feared that boys wouldn't want to buy anything labeled as doll, so they came up with the new term action figure, a term that sounds a lot more manlier than doll. G.I. Joe was a military-themed 11.5-inch figure idea by Stan Weston. Stan Weston was a New Yorker and former Korean War vet who was a licensed agent who oversaw branding for Supercells and Twiggy during the 1960s. After visiting Army surplus stores in New York City, Stan came up with a plan for a military toy line that would become known as G.I. Joe. Stan licensed his military doll to Hasbro for $100,000. Although Hasbro came up with the term action figure, they did not trademark the name. However, they did trademark America's movable figure, which appeared on every G.I. Joe figure box at the time. G.I. Joe was a huge hit, and this spawned other toy companies to cash in on the action figure market. In 1965, Roscoe released their action figure line with the Johnny Hero line, but they chose to use the term boy doll rather than go with action figure. With the success of G.I. Joe, the action figure was born, and with it, not just the name, but the look. Action figures for the most part in the 1960s were between 11 to 13 inches, changeable clothes, and military heroes.
Man and Robin, the dynamic duo. Superman, the Man of Steel. Aquaman, the famous undersea crime fighter.
That was until Mako decided to shake things up a bit when they got the toy rights to DC Comics and Marvel Comics in 1972. They decided to take the action figure scale down to 8 inches, but still keep the doll-like look. The line would be called the world's greatest superheroes, and finally, G.I. Joe had competition.
Mako presents the Planet of the Apes action figures.
Mako didn't stop with superheroes, as they turned their plans to something unheard of at the time: movie tie-in toys. Mako saw the box office success of Planet of the Apes as more than just a flash in the pan. With a sequel already lined up, Mako knew this was a market just waiting to be tapped. In 1974, they released their Planet of the Apes action figure line, keeping them scaled down to 8 inches like the superheroes line. Mako, however, failed to get the legal rights to use Planet of the Apes star Charlton Heston's likeness for a Taylor action figure. Therefore, Mako released the Astronaut action figure with a generic mold looking nothing like Charlton Heston. Mako didn't stop with one movie tie-in. Also that same year, they got the rights to the movie classic Wizard of Oz, Tarzan, and TV shows such as Happy Days, Our Gang, The Waltons, and a failed 3-season TV show that was now a huge hit in syndication.
Mako presents the Star Trek action figures featuring the crew of the Enterprise.
Mako was able to buy the rights for the Star Trek action figure line for only $5,000. That $5,000 investment would end up making Mako over $50 million by the end of his Star Trek run. No one but Mako saw the need for TV and movie-based action figures. With the Star Trek line, again Mako kept the action figure line to 8 inches. To Mako, this was the best size for kids' small hands and made them perfect for kid play. Along with the action figure, Mako was able to make playsets to give the action figures more to do than just jump off the kid's bed. However, the 12-inch doll size wasn't dead yet, and it was being kept very much alive thanks to a small toy company in Cincinnati, Ohio, who was also getting into the TV tie-in toy business. Kenner Products were founded in 1946 by brothers Albert, Philip, and Joseph Steiner. Kenner got its name from the street where the original office was located in Cincinnati, Ohio. In the early 60s, Kenner found success with their glider and panel building set and the Easy Bake Oven.
It's Kenner. It's fun.
The company was bought out by General Mills in 1967. Kenner was now able to bring more to his ever-growing list of toys by adding Play-Doh and more.
Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man.
In 1975, Kenner took a page out of Mego's playbook and bought the license for the hit television show $6 Million Man. The show was already into its second season and was a favorite with kids. Keeping with the Hasbro's G.I. Joe line, Kenner kept the $6 Million Man action figures closer to doll size. A little bigger than the 11-inch G.I. Joe, these stood 13 inches. The doll size, be it 8 inches or 13 inches, was the standard size. But that was all about to change, as things were about to get a whole lot smaller.
空を見ろ、鳥だ、飛行機だ、あ、ミクロだ。
弾よりも速く、力は機関車よりも強く。
In 1976, Mego licensed Micro Man action figures from Takara, who had a huge success with the line in Japan since 1974, and rebranded it Micronauts. With a gas crisis causing production costs to skyrocket, Mego kept the Micro Man line Micro.
This is the world of the Micronauts, a Croyer, the enemy, and the Micronaut Space Warriors, all sold separately. Space Glider, Galactic Warrior, Time Traveler.
The 8-inch superhero was no longer the smallest guys on the toy shelves. Micronauts were 3.75 inches tall. The cloth clothes needed for the large size action figures was also cut out to save cost. These were smaller, cheaper, and just as fun. The line became yet another huge hit, earning the company $3 million. Mego was the driving force for boy toys in the mid-70s. However, a new force was about to change action figures forever. As Mego's Martin Abrams was hammering out the deal to bring Micronauts to the U.S., his brother David Abrams was rejecting a license deal between Lucasfilms for an upcoming science fiction film that seemed right for the toy business, called Star Wars. David Abrams felt that Mego would go bankrupt if it was to make toys based on every flash-in-the-pan science fiction B-movie that came along. After being turned down by Mako, Lucasfilm set its sights on Kenner, who bought the rights for a one-time flat fee of $100,000. However, the film was set to open in 1977, and it would take Kenner more than a year to get figures produced, shipped, marketed, and in stores. This could really hurt the success of the toy line, as most movies at this time would be long forgotten within a few months of its release. The film opened in May of 1977, and it grew and grew all summer. Adults loved it, but better for Kenner, the kids loved it. To say Star Wars was a successful film is an understatement. It was a culture shift. Not only can he talk about the movie business before and after Star Wars, there's also the toy business before and after Star Wars.
The attitude we're taking in our planning is that George Lucas has created this marvelous fantasy world, peopled by all kinds of droids and exciting creatures, and we think that it could be another Disney. Maybe 50 years from now, they'll be celebrating R2-D2's 50th anniversary.
Demand for Star Wars merchandise was high, and Kenner needed to be ready for Christmas of 1977. It released a few board games, puzzles, and more, but it needed action figures. Kenner had already decided to use the success of the Micronauts 3.75 scale for their Star Wars figures. This would be best to make ships and playsets for the action figures to play in. However, Kenner did keep the old large doll size figures around also in a separate large size action figure line. As the Christmas season got closer and closer, it was clear Kenner couldn't have action figures on the shelves. So they did the next best thing. They released an almost empty box with the promise of 4 Star Wars action figures mailed to kids as soon as they were produced. In early 1978, Kenner Star Wars action figures finally hit kids' hands and toy stores, and like the film, it forever changed pop culture. By the end of 1978, Kenner has sold over 4 million Star Wars action figures, making the company over $100 million.
But Cincinnati-based Kenner Corporation sales are up 40%, and Kenner officials say the movie Star Wars is responsible. Last year, Kenner won the rights to manufacture toys based on the movie, paying millions in royalties. But Kenner says it'll pay off. They've shipped over 30 million Star Wars toys this season, and they're firmly convinced the craze could last for years.
However, not all things Star Wars was a success. The 12-inch large-size action figure line, which was a few years ago the action figure standard, failed to sell and was soon canceled. This brought an end to the era of doll-size, large action figures. With the release of Kenner's Star Wars action figures, the action figure market changed almost overnight. Action figures were shrunken down. The doll size was no longer what kids wanted and almost seemed out of date. Within 5 years of Kenner's Star Wars release, the toy powerhouse Mako that launched the success of movie and TV tie-ins filed bankruptcy as it was unable to stay above the water as Star Wars demanded the toy business. In the wake of Star Wars action figures, even G.I. Joe had to scale himself down to 3 inches to compete. But nothing stays on top forever, and Mattel would fight back with its own science fiction action figure line as the action figure boom of the 80s explodes.
You're doomed, He-Man.
Would you like to see part 2 of the history of action figures? If so, please like and share this video. If we get enough views, we will continue with part 2, the 80s action figure boom.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.